So, let's talk about a guy who started as a gladiator, a man basically sentenced to die for other people's entertainment. And yet he ended up a legend. He led a rebellion that took on the most powerful republic in the entire world and, really shook it to its core. We are, of course, talking about the story of Spartacus. And this isn't just some old story. I mean, centuries later, you've got the famous philosopher Voltaire looking back at this incredibly brutal slave rebellion, and what does he call it? The only just war in history. Wow. That single phrase right there tells you just how deep this story runs, how much it's resonated through the ages. But, and this is the big question, who was the real guy behind this towering legend? That's the real trick, isn't it? To get to the truth, we've got to peel back like 2,000 years of myths and movies and all kinds of political symbolism to find the actual historical person at the heart of it all. So, let's get one thing straight. Spartacus's journey, it doesn't kick off with some grand plan for a revolution. No way. It starts in chains. It starts in the brutal, blood-soaked arenas of Rome, where, believe it or not, death was literally a form of public entertainment. Okay, so who was he? Well, ancient historians tell us he was a Thracian, but the really crucial detail here is his background. See, he wasn't just some random captive. He had prior military experience, probably even serving with the Romans at some point. And that changes everything, right? It means he wasn't just a strong guy fighting for his life. He was a trained soldier who knew exactly how his enemy thought and fought. And it all started with this number, 70. Not some massive army, not thousands of rebels, just 70 men. It's 73 BC, and inside a gladiator school near Capua, Spartacus and about 70 other gladiators just made a choice. They decided they'd rather die fighting to be free than die for a crowd's entertainment. And their plan? Honestly, it was born out of pure desperation. I mean, they had no weapons. So what did they do? They grabbed kitchen knives, meat cleavers, whatever they could find. They fought their way out, got lucky, and captured a wagon full of actual gladiator gear. And then did something really smart. They immediately ran for the high ground on Mount Vesuvius. That's like military strategy 101 for survival. And you know what? That one small, desperate act, it was like a spark that would ignite a fire that just ripped across the entire Italian peninsula. It transformed this tiny handful of escapees into a massive army of the oppressed. And right away at Mount Vesuvius, we see Spartacus's tactical genius. So Rome sends this militia, right? And they camp at the only path up the volcano, thinking, hey, we'll just starve them out. Easy. But Spartacus? He has his men weave ropes out of wild vines, they rappel down the sheer cliff on the other side of the mountain, and they completely surprise the Romans from behind. It was an absolute rout. And for Rome, a total, utter humiliation. So of course, news of this incredible victory just spread like wildfire. You've got slaves from the countryside, shepherds, the rural poor, they all start flocking to his banner. And that little group of 70 guys, it just ballooned into this massive force. We're talking an estimated 70,000 people. And this is a really important point, especially because of how movies show it. This was not just an army of gladiators. It was a whole coalition of the dispossessed, you know? The gladiators, for sure, they were the experienced, battle-hardened core. But the sheer numbers? That came from the oppressed rural folks all over Italy, which gave the rebellion just immense manpower. Now, at first, Rome just kind of brushed this off. Oh, it's just a minor policing issue. But after getting beaten again and again, they couldn't ignore it anymore. The Senate was now seriously alarmed, and they decided it was time to unleash the full, terrifying might of the Roman legions. And for 2 whole years, the rebels were, well, shockingly successful. They were marching all over Italy, and they weren't just beating local militias anymore. They were defeating multiple Roman consular armies. We're talking the Republic's main fighting forces. So yeah, this was no longer some small revolt. It was a real legitimate threat to the city of Rome itself. So, who do you call when you have a problem like this? Rome turned to this guy, Marcus Licinius Crassus. He was the wealthiest man in Rome and incredibly ambitious. And to get his panicked soldiers back in line, he brought back this absolutely brutal punishment called decimation. That's where 1 in every 10 men in a unit that failed was killed by their own friends. His goal was simple. He wanted his men to fear him more than they feared Spartacus. Eventually, Spartacus's army gets pushed all the way down to the toe of Italy's boot. He had a plan, though. He was going to hire pirates to get his army across to Sicily, maybe start an even bigger revolt there. But the pirates took his money and just sailed away. They betrayed him. And just like that, the door to escape slammed shut. And that was it. Crassus finally had them cornered. In the final, decisive battle, the rebel army was just utterly crushed. 6,000 of them were captured alive. And what happened to them? Well, it was meant to be a horrific message to the entire Roman world. Crassus ordered every single one of those 6,000 captives to be crucified. Their crosses lined the Appian Way, that's the main road from Rome all the way back to Capua, where the whole thing started. For weeks, maybe months, anyone traveling that road would see this gruesome 100-mile-long display of Roman vengeance. The warning was clear. This is the price of defiance. But what about Spartacus himself? Well, the ancient historians say he died fighting right there on the front lines, like a true general in the thick of it all. But here's the thing. His body was never found, never identified. And that final mystery, the fact that they couldn't produce a body, that was really the seed from which his legend would begin to grow. So the man was gone. His army was destroyed. But the story of Spartacus, it was far from over. Actually, in a lot of ways, it was just getting started. So you have to wonder, what was his endgame? What was he actually trying to do? It's a really fascinating debate. You've got the historian Plutarch, who says his goal was simple: escape. Just get his people over the Alps and back to their homes. But then you have others, like Appian and Florus, who claim he had this unbelievably audacious goal of actually marching on Rome itself. The truth? We'll probably never know for sure. And this is so crucial to remember. Think about who told this story. We don't have a single account from Spartacus, not one from any of his followers. Every single word we have was written by his enemies, the Romans. And not right away either, often a century or more after it happened. So what we're seeing is this entire rebellion filtered completely through the eyes of the victors. So fast forward to the modern era, and Spartacus is basically reborn. You have figures like Karl Marx looking back and seeing him as the ultimate historical hero. Not just a rebel, but a symbol of class struggle, right? A real representative of the ancient working class, fighting against this corrupt slave-owning elite. Spartacus the man became Spartacus the idea. And that idea turned out to be incredibly powerful. I mean, look at Toussaint Louverture, the leader of the Haitian Revolution, the only successful slave revolt in history. They called him the Black Spartacus. You had German communists who formed the Spartacus League, and his name even became a symbol for the state. The Soviets created their own version of the Olympics called the Spartakiad to compete with what they saw as the bourgeois games. And that really brings us to the final thought here. Spartacus lost. Let's be clear, his rebellion was brutally, totally crushed. And yet, his story has far outlasted the story of the man who beat him, Crassus. Why is that? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Maybe a legacy isn't measured just by winning or losing. Maybe it's about the power of the idea you're fighting for, an idea of freedom that can still inspire people thousands of years down the line.